Okay, we're on Amos chapter 7, and this is a fascinating chapter. I did a little research on it today. Verse 1 says, "Thus Adonai Yahweh showed me, and behold, he was forming a locust swarm when the spring crop began to sprout. And behold, the spring crop was after the king's mowing." Now, Amos has three visions in this chapter of the destruction of Israel. And here Amos sees a locust swarm at the time when the spring crop is about to sprout. Now, the locusts spoken of here were probably what he was seeing them in their caterpillar state, which is when they're the most destructive. And the time of the king's mowings or feedings or grazings, this would have been in the month of March as we know it. Now, a locust swarm is a plague that Elohim said would be a punishment if they broke his covenant. We see in Deuteronomy 28, verse 38, "You shall bring out much seed to the field, but you shall gather in little, for the locust shall consume it." It's a plague that people, you can't do anything about it. I mean, it just is. And a lot of times when locusts would pass, death by plague and famine would be the result. But there's not really a locust swarm per se that he's speaking of here. Verse 2, "And it came about when he had finished eating the vegetation of the land that I said, Adonai Yahweh, please pardon. How can Jacob stand? For he is small." So in this vision, the land is cleaned of vegetation by the locust swarm. Now, Amos saw this vision of the locust swarm as a symbolic thing, as it's an attack on Israel by a foreign enemy. Okay, and what he does here is he pleads to Elohim for forgiveness of the people. He says, "Please pardon Adonai Yahweh." Now, what this is speaking of is the first attack by Assyria on the northern kingdom of Israel. Now, they did this 3 times, and it's just like Amos tells us in this chapter. This attack and the taking of captives happened at approximately 740 BC. It's spoken of in 1 Chronicles 5, verse 26. "So the Elohim of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, even the spirit of Tilgath-Pileser, king of Assyria. And he carried them away into exile, namely the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and brought them to Halor, Habor, Hara, and to the river of Gozan, to this day." So he took part of them captive. There were 10 tribes, keep that in mind. And there were 10 and a half, and then some of them here were taken. Verse 3, "Yahweh changed his mind about this. It shall not be, said Yahweh." Well, Amos, why did he change his mind? Why did Elohim change his mind?
Because he loved Amos, I guess.
The prayers of a righteous man avails much. Where do you think James got that? This is one of the places he got it from. So Elohim spared Israel, at least for the time being, at that particular instance. Elohim, he will relent. So he doesn't, it says changed his mind. Well, that's a term we use. Elohim never changes his mind. No, he doesn't change his mind, but he will change his actions in order to display his grace and mercy. Okay? That doesn't mean, oh, Israel's okay now. I changed my mind. You know how those Israelites are. Kids will be kids, right? That's not what he does. He relented in his punishment to display his grace and mercy, and to display it to Amos and to others. We read in Psalm 106, starting at verse 43, "Many times he would deliver them. They, however, were rebellious in their counsel, and so sank down in their iniquity. Nevertheless, he looked upon their distress when he heard their cry, and he remembered his covenant for their sake, and relented according to the greatness of his loving kindness," or grace. That's why he relented. Because of the greatness of his loving kindness.
He didn't change his mind on the Torah.
No, he didn't change his mind on anything really, but he will change his actions sometimes to display that grace and mercy.
He did that at Mount Sinai.
Yeah, he relented from destroying them. It's not that he didn't want to, it's not that he didn't deserve it. It's not that he felt differently about it. You know, when we see change our mind, We think, oh, okay, I was wrong all along. You know, you're right, I was wrong. That's changing my mind. That's never the case with Elohim. Verse 4. Thus Adonai Yahweh showed me, and behold, Adonai Yahweh was calling to contend with them by fire. And it consumed the great deep and began to consume the farmland. You know, the second vision of Amos, that was fire consuming the land. Elohim threatens again to totally annihilate the people. Verses 5 and 6. Then I said, Adonai Yahweh, please stop. How can Jacob stand, for he is small? Yahweh changed his mind about this. This too shall not be, said Adonai Yahweh. Now, once again, Amos intercedes for the people. And Elohim decides against a total destruction of this northern kingdom. Remember, he did the same thing with Israel with Moses. Remember, he would destroy thousands of them by a plague or whatever. And due to the intercession of Moses and Aaron and others, Elohim relented in what he was doing. That's what happened here too. This particular judgment of Israel was the invasion of the tribe of Naphtali by the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser, and sometime in either 734 or 732 during that era. We read about it in 2 Kings 15, verse 29. In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and captured Ijon and Abel Beth-Maachah and Genoa and Kadesh and Hazor and Gilead and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and he carried them captive to Assyria. Verses 7 and 8. Thus he showed me, and behold, Adonai was standing by a vertical wall with a plumb line in his hand. And Yahweh said to me, what do you see, Amos? And I said, a plumb line. Then Adonai said, behold, I'm about to put a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel. I will spare them no longer. I'm glad you asked. Anybody else wondering, what is a plumb line? Notice there's a B at the end of that, so it's not a purple fruit line, right? Okay, a plumb. My dad had one. He was big in construction. Yeah, carpenters have them too. What it is, it's something that's shaped kind of like it's a circular wedge, okay, and it's pointed at the bottom. All right, and it'll have a string, and it'll have a knob on top, and you can wind this long string there. And what you do is you hang it down to determine what is straight down. All right? So if you're up at a certain height or whatever, get your building walls or whatever, get them straight up and down. You can use a carpenter's level, but you can also use a plumb line. Just as a matter of trivia, when the Golden Gate Bridge was built in San Francisco, the two big pillars that you see, the big red pillars, the tops are up 3 inches further apart than the bottoms of the base. Because it's going toward the center of the earth, and due to the curvature of the earth, the tops are just a little bit wider apart than the bottoms. That's due to it being plumb, going straight down. Well, that's what he's saying here about them, is this, got a plumb line out. That's what Elohim had. He's got a straight line here. That's how he judges by, a very straight line. And it's undeviating. Metaphorically, what he's talking about is his righteousness. It's like a plumb line. It's straight. When measured by Elohim's plumb line, Israel was seen to be crooked and in error. Therefore, judgment was sure. You know, this is the same thing that John the Baptist said about the Pharisees. In Matthew 3, the first 3 verses, now in those days John the Baptist came preaching in the wilderness of Judea, saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. For this is the one referred to by Isaiah the prophet, saying, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make ready the way of Yahweh, make his paths straight. See, he's saying my ways are like that plumb line. They go straight down. Okay, they're easy. It doesn't go like this. You hang that plumb by a string, it goes straight to this, points right to the center of the earth. That's what Elohim says his ways are. And John the Baptist came to straighten out those ways that had gone due to the Pharisees and scribes, the way they had made them go to the left and to the right. Verse 9 of Amos 7. The high places of Isaac will be desolated, and the sanctuaries of Israel laid waste. Then shall I rise up against the house of Jeroboam with the sword. The 10 northern tribes of Israel had set up 2 similar places of worship in Bethel and Samaria, similar to the one that was in Jerusalem. Now, this was done in order to give credence and appearance of blessings to that northern kingdom from Elohim to them, so they could, at least the people could think they were doing the right thing. Now, for Amos to decry their form of worship was to denounce that whole kingdom. Amos called out Jeroboam, who was the first king of the northern kingdom. And this Jeroboam Jeroboam was also the name of the king at that time. But the very first king of Israel, the northern kingdom, his name was Jeroboam. That's not Jeroboam. I looked it up. And this one right here, I looked this one up. You know how to say this one? That's Amos, yeah. I looked it up too, just in case. Amos? Oh, Jeroboam. It's not Jeroboam. Well, Jeroboam was that first king of the northern kingdom. He set up these 2 places, in the northern part of the northern kingdom and the southern part of the northern kingdom, so they wouldn't go into Jerusalem and worship at the temple, the place where Elohim said they were supposed to worship. Because if they do that, he may lose his citizens. They'll all just stay in the southern kingdom. And he didn't want that. Well, the succeeding 18 kings of the northern kingdom upheld that, those false places of worship. They all upheld that. Well, the epitaph for these kings, for many of them, was the same. Like Baasha. Look at Baasha's epitaph. It's in 1 Kings 15, verse 34. And he did evil in the sight of Yahweh, and walked in the way of Jeroboam, and in his sin, which he made Israel sin. He kept Israel from going to the place they were supposed to go 3 times a year, and set up his own appointed times, which were false. Now, by this time, Israel was steeped in idolatry. This judgment was already prophesied in Torah. In Leviticus 26, verses 30 and 31, I then will destroy your high places. I'll cut down your incense altars, and heap your remains on the remains of your idols, for my soul shall abhor you. I will lay waste to your cities as well, and will make your sanctuaries desolate. I will not smell your soothing aromas. Well, it all happened just as Amos prophesied. Assyria invaded once more. Then they completely desolated Israel and took the remainder of the nation into captivity. We read in 2 Kings 18, starting at verse 9. Now it came about in the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which was the 7th year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against Samaria and besieged it. And at the end of 3 years, they captured it. In the 6th year of Hezekiah, which was the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel, Samaria was captured. Then the king of Assyria carried Israel away into exile to Assyria, and put them in Halah and on the harbor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes, because they did not obey the voice of Yahweh their Elohim, but transgressed his covenant, even all that Moses, the servant of Yahweh, commanded. They would neither listen nor do it. Yeah.
They would defeat them, take them away into captivity. What happened to the cities where they were, where Israel was living at the time?
Laid desolate, laid waste, tore down.
So I was going to say, yeah, now what did they do when they just tore everything up?
Right. And they'd like to do it in front of the people watch. That house, nice house you built. Hey, you remember they had a lot of them had 2 houses in the northern kingdom. They had a summer house and a winter house. Some were made of ivory, had just beautiful ornate houses. Now, Assyria, that'd be part of the punishment. You're going to watch this go up in flames. That's just a small part of the punishment. Verse 10. Then Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, sent word to Jeroboam, king of Israel. Keep in mind, there was another Jeroboam. You know, they were proud of their king, so they would rename their sons after these same Jeroboam guys. Sent word to Jeroboam, king of Israel, saying, Amos has conspired against you in the midst of the house of Israel. The land is unable to endure his words. Now Amaziah was some kind of a priest in Bethel. He ran to the king, told him a bunch of lies. You know, false priests are accustomed to dealing with false words. But regardless, if Amos is not a man of Elohim, then his words are meaningless, and why not just let him say what he wants? You know what I mean? If he's just out there saying, we're going to be destroyed, and they're not the words of Elohim, what difference does it make what a guy's standing in the street saying? You know? But they knew he was a prophet.
At least they know how stupid we are when we know.
Yeah, they did learn. Look at verse 11. For thus Amos says, Jeroboam will die by the sword, and Israel will certainly go from its land into exile. Then Amaziah said to Amos, Go, you seer, flee away to the land of Judah, and there eat bread, and there do your prophesying. But no longer prophesy at Bethel, for it is a sanctuary of the king and a royal residence. So Amos is told by Amaziah to go ahead, get out of the country, leave here, go back to Judah. That's where he came from, was Judah. Amaziah he may have been some kind of high priest in their form of worship that they did. Still golden calf stuff, though, by the way. Verse 14. Then Amos answered and said to Amaziah, I'm not a prophet, nor am I the son of a prophet, for I'm a herdsman and a grower of sycamore figs. Well, if you notice, he just ignores what Amaziah said to Jeroboam. He didn't care what he said. Just ignored it. He says, I'm not a professional prophet. I don't have any credentials. Okay? He says, I'm just a shepherd. And Elohim told me to come up here and tell you guys this. That's all. He says here, I'm not a son of a prophet. Okay, that's a term that dates back to the days of Samuel and Elisha. They used to have understudies. Samuel and Elisha would. And they were called sons of prophets. Okay, and they would learn from these guys. And he said, well, I'm not one of those either. I'm just a herdsman. Verses 15 and 16. But Yahweh took me from following the flock, and Yahweh said to me, Go prophesy to my people Israel. And now we're going back to what Amaziah is saying. Now hear the word of Yahweh. You were saying, You shall not prophesy against Israel, nor shall you speak against the house of Isaac. That's what Amaziah is telling him. You can't say that. You weren't going to say those things. Now he's going to be cursed for this. Verse 17. Therefore thus says Yahweh, Your wife will become a harlot in the city. Your sons and your daughters will fall by the sword. Your land will be parceled up by a measuring line. You yourself will die upon unclean soil. Moreover, Israel will certainly go from its land into exile. So Amos tells the future for Amaziah. His children will be killed. Amaziah will be taken captive to Assyria. He'll die there. His wife will be reduced to being a whore for the invading Assyrian soldiers. We read in 2 Kings 17, starting at verse 6, In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and carried Israel away into exile to Assyria, settled them in Halah and Habor, on the river of Gozan in the cities of the Medes. And now this came about because the sons of Israel had sinned against Yahweh their Elohim, who brought them up from the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they had feared other gods, and walked in the customs of the nations whom Yahweh had driven out before the sons of Israel, and in the customs of the kings of Israel which they had introduced. And the sons of Israel did things secretly which were not right against Yahweh their Elohim. Moreover, they built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city. They set for themselves sacred pillars and asherim on every high hill and under every green tree. And there they burned incense on all the high places, as the nations did, which Yahweh had carried away to exile before them. And they did evil things, provoking Yahweh. And they served idols, concerning which Yahweh had said to them, "You shall not do this thing." Yet Yahweh warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and every seer, saying, "Turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments, my statutes, according to all the Torah which I commanded your fathers, and which I sent to you through my servants the prophets." However, they did not listen, but stiffened their neck like their fathers, who did not believe in Yahweh their Elohim. And they rejected his statutes and his covenant which he made with their fathers, and his warnings which he warned them. And they followed vanity and became vain, and went after the nations which surrounded them, concerning which Yahweh had commanded them not to do like them. And they forsook all the commandments of Yahweh their Elohim, and made for themselves molten images, even 2 calves, and made an Asherah, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. Now, this particular passage just gives us detail as to what they were doing. And I talked to y'all before about the brutality of the Assyrians. First of all, in the ancient Assyrian writings, these 3 invasions of Israel, they're there. They're written about by Tiglath-Pileser, that he did do those things, just like Scripture said he would. And there was, in the ancient Assyrian writings and drawings, we see this. We read, "I built a wall before the great gates of the city. I flayed the chief men of the rebels, and I covered the wall with their skins. Some of them were enclosed alive in the bricks of the wall. Some of them were crucified on stakes along the wall. I caused a great multitude of them to be flayed in my presence, and I covered the wall with their skins. I gathered together the heads in the forms of crowns, and their pierced bodies in the forms of garlands. Asher, my Lord, commanded me to go forth." That's their god. "I covered the regions of Sarash and of Amos with ruins. I proved myself against their armies at the mountain of Arumah. I chastised them. I strawed the earth with their bodies, as they had beasts of the field. I took their cities in possession. I carried away their gods. I led them away captive, them and their goods and their treasures. I burned their cities with fire. I destroyed them. I made them even with the ground." That's how I knew that, by the way, Cliff. I made of them heaps in a desolation. I laid upon them the grievous yoke of my dominion. And in their presence I gave thanks unto Asher, my Lord. I slew 260 fighting men. I cut off their heads and made pyramids thereof. I slew one of every 2. Now, that's your Assyrian invading army. And Elohim warned them and warned them and warned them. Let's look at Amos chapter 8. "Thus Adonai Yahweh showed me, and behold, there was a basket of summer fruit. And he said, What do you see, Amos? And I said, A basket of summer fruit. Then Yahweh said to me, The end is come for my people Israel. I will spare them no longer." Okay, this basket's filled with ripe fruit. That means the time for picking the fruit was the correct time. Israel's the same way. The time for judgment was at the right time. They're ripe for judgment. Verse 3. "The songs of the palace will turn to wailing in that day, declares Adonai Yahweh. For many will be the corpses. In every place they'll cast them forth in silence." Doesn't that sound just like what we read in those Assyrian inscriptions? "Hear this, you who trample the needy, to do away with the humble of the land, saying, When will the new moon be over, so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath, that we may open the wheat market, to make the bushel smaller and the shekel bigger, and to cheat with dishonest scales?" Okay, the sins of the people, what happened is they reached the peak. Elohim said, okay, I've had it up to here. Songs in the palace are going to turn to wailing. Corpses are going to be plentiful. And the sins of the people are delineated. They trample the needy. They do away with the humble of the land. They were preoccupied with making money. The businessmen despised the interruptions caused by the new moon and the Sabbaths. And the new moon spoken of here would be Feast of Trumpets. That's the only new moon that is a a Sabbath-like day, a Sabbath-like observance. They despised that. It interrupted their business, their time to make money. You know, in theory, if you work 7 days out of 7 as opposed to 6 out of 7, how much more money will you make? A seventh more. Well, that governed them. That's what they went by. The money's everything. They couldn't wait until these days of rest and worship were over so they could get to work, make more money. They deceitfully found ways to add to the profits. They would skimp on the standard measure so the customers got less than for what they paid. They would be boosting the price by substituting a heavier shekel weight so that customers were overcharged. They were cheating with dishonest scales by tampering with the crossbeam of the balances. Elohim strictly prohibits deceitful business practices. He strictly prohibits that in his Torah. Leviticus 19, verses 35 and 36. You shall do no wrong in judgment, in measurement of weight or capacity. You shall have just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin. I am Yahweh your Elohim who brought you out from the land of Egypt. He doesn't tolerate deceitful business practices.
Cheating on your hours. People do that now.
Yeah. Deuteronomy 25, starting at verse 13. You shall not have in your bag differing weights, a large and a small. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a full and just weight. You shall have a full and just measure, that your days may be prolonged in the land which Yahweh your Elohim gives you. Proverbs 11:1 says, a false balance is an abomination to Yahweh, but a just weight is his delight. Proverbs 16:11, a just balance and scales belong to Yahweh. All the weights of the bag are his concern. Proverbs 20, verse 10, differing weights and differing measures, both of them are abominable to Yahweh. Proverbs 20, verse 23, differing weights are an abomination to Yahweh, and a false scale is not good. Let's look at verse 6. Oh, there's Amos 2. Oh, this is another thing they were doing. They cared nothing about human suffering. The inability of the poor to pay, they could not have cared less about. Instead, they forced the needy into slavery. And they would sell them for little to nothing. We just read in Amos 2, verse 6 a few weeks ago, thus says Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4 I'll not revoke its punishment, because they sell the righteous for money, and the needy for a pair of sandals. You know, it says in Proverbs, and also in the Psalms, that when you help the poor brethren among us, the unrighteous rich wail in pain. See, I found that fascinating because right away I knew what that meant. I knew what that meant. If you have a man that's poor and he has to feed his family, he'll do anything to do it. You know what? You can pay that man a dime to the dollar that he works, and he'll take it. That's why when you help a poor brethren like that, he says, the unrighteous rich will wail because they can't put the screws to them. And that's what they're doing here. Verse 6 of Amos 8. So as to buy the helpless for money and the needy for a pair of sandals, and that we may sell the refuse of the wheat. He's bringing up about selling the needy for a pair of sandals again. You know, they weren't content with just violating the covenant with Elohim, with these unfair business practices. They compounded their sin by deceptively selling an inferior product and doing it intentionally. They would take the sweepings of the soiled and trampled grain and mix and package it with clean, pure wheat and sell it as one product. Just stealing. Yeah.
The waste is edible, but very little because we used to feed that to the swine or whatever.
Sure. Maybe edible, but then they're selling it as all pure product. Verses 7 and 8 of Amos 8. Yahweh has sworn by the pride of Jacob, indeed, I will never forget any of their deeds. Because of this will not the land quake, and everyone who dwells in it mourn? Indeed, all of it will rise up like the Nile, and it'll be tossed about and subside like the Nile of Egypt. You know, it's describing an earthquake here. The rising and falling of the ground in a wave-like motion that's compared to the rising and falling of the Nile, as it would annually flood the area and then it would recede again. That's how the land's being described here. Well, the judgment that Elohim's going to pronounce on the land is going to be as devastating as an earthquake that does that. He's not going to send an earthquake to wipe them out. An earthquake doesn't tell them the proper thing. He's going to send Assyria. Verse 9. It'll come about in that day, the earthquake, by the way, it's just metaphorical. It'll come about in that day, declares Adonai Yahweh, that I shall make the sun go down at noon and make the earth dark in broad daylight. A lot of people think this is referring to an eclipse, and Bishop Usher showed that about 11 years after Amos prophesied, there was an eclipse here, two great eclipses of the sun. One at tabernacles and the other sometime around Passover, but that is not what this is talking about. He says he'll make the sun go down at noon and the earth dark at broad daylight. That means sudden darkness in the middle of the day is a reference to sudden death in that northern kingdom. That's what that's referring to. I don't have a lot of confidence in these guys that tend to go back in time and tell us when eclipses were and Elohim was predicting this. I don't. When the earth stood still and these explanations for it. Take that stuff with a grain of salt. Okay? The explanations are usually just forged and forced in order to make something fit. Verse 10. Then I shall turn your festivals into mourning and all your songs into lamentation. And I'll bring sackcloth on everyone's loins and baldness on every head. And I'll make it like a time of mourning for an only son. And the time of it will be like a bitter day. So this is what the mourning is going to be like due to the devastation. There's going to be an unprecedented grief that comes on the land. He's going to turn their festivals into funerals. Their glad singing, weeping lamentation. The loss of life would be so widespread that every family would grieve and every home would observe the rites of mourning. The intensity of that grief is like losing your only son, knowing that the family's not going to go further, that the family's done. There's no future. That's the kind of grieving they're going to have. Verses 11 and 12. Behold, days are coming, declares Adonai Yahweh, when I'll send a famine on the land, not a famine for bread or a thirst for water, but rather for hearing the words of Yahweh. And the people will stagger from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east. They'll go to and fro to seek the word of Yahweh, but they will not find it. You know, since Israel has rejected his words, they're going to hear his words no more. Elohim would send a famine, but it's not going to be a famine of bread or water as they've had before. But they're not going to hear the words of Elohim anymore. They're going to inquire of him. They're not going to get answers. He's already talked to them. They didn't want to listen. Now, why should he listen to them when they inquire of him? What's the point? Verses 13 and 14. In that day the beautiful virgins and the young men will faint from thirst. As for those who swear by the guilt of Samaria, who say, as your God lives, O Dan, and as the way of Beersheba lives, they will fall and not rise again. Even the youngest and the strongest, who have the most vigor, are going to pass out from searching for hope. And they're not going to get anything. At least something to cling to. And they're not going to find it. No hope from Elohim at all. No words. The term from Dan to Beersheba, what that means is that's over the whole land. Okay, it's an expression they used. In those two verses here, Judges 20, verse 1, then all the sons of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, came out, and the congregation assembled as one man to Yahweh at Mizpah. 1 Samuel 3:20, and all Israel from Dan even to Beersheba knew that Samuel was confirmed as a prophet of Yahweh. So that's why he mentions those in that verse. It's going to be the whole land.